Hi, I'm Mary Lyons, the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander with Acorn Grove.
Welcome to the Wealth and Income Podcast.
We are, as we always say, we're excited to be here, but I'm especially excited to be here today. We have one of my favorite humans, a guy named Howard Polansky, and Howard and I got introduced. I don't know. It feels like 5 minutes ago, but it was probably much longer than that, like in dog years. I'm not sure how many years that was ago, but it was pretty quick. But Howard and I got introduced to a networking partner of ours, and we have had a ton of fun walking through what he calls being financially led, and kind of exploring all this pieces. So thank you for being on with us today, Howard.
Oh, thank you, Eric and Mary. Great to see you guys today.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
before we jump into kind of the voodoo that you do, tell us a little bit of how you kind of got into this, because you're talking about a lot of cash flow optimization, but you've kind of had this sort of storied career of doing a bunch of different things. So what made you get into the financial end of the world?
Well, I mean, I always loved personal finance, but that's not where I started. For 16 years, I was a dentist, which is an obvious, right turn to, the financial world. But the Navy paid for dentistry. I owed years back as a dentist. So I did 1 year in Chicago, 3 years in Southern Japan, got out of the Navy, moved to Austin, Texas, opened up my own practice, had that for 9.5 years. And in late 2016, I just got burnt out. I didn't know where to go, how to pivot. And I tell people now, sometimes life leaves you little clues, and other times life hits you with a 2x4.
Hmm. Yes, it
My
does.
two, my 2x4 moment was May of 2018. So we're talking, it's unbelievable to think it's 6 years ago now. My older son, he comes home with a stomach ache. 3 days later, we're in the ICU at the Children's Hospital having emergency surgery. It was appendicitis that turned septic, 29 days in the hospital, 19 of them in the ICU, 8 straight days of sedation because he went to the operating room 5 times. After they take the tube out of his throat and after they bring him down from the drugs he was on, the very first question he would only ask me, am I dying?
Yeah.
My first breath was, did I hear him correctly? My second breath was, do not lose it right now. I look him in the eyes. I tell him, no, you're not dying. You've had prayers from thousands of people all around the world, and you're going to be just fine. He looks at me. He knows I'm telling him the truth. He closes his eyes to get more rest. I walk outside the room, and then I broke.
Mhm.
And there was just, as I'm sitting there as a mess on the floor in the ICU of the hospital, only one thought seared into my mind. If life is this fragile and I'm unhappy with the path that I'm on, burn the ships. It's over.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I sold my practice in September 2018, walked away from the dental chair.
So in a minute here, we're going to talk about how you were able to do that. But I just want to take a minute and I think this is part of the reason that it's so important that you're on this podcast with us today. And I find that it's the stories like this that really ground me in the work that we're doing as a firm, because the number of people that Eric and I encounter on a daily basis that are financially successful and comfortable, but maybe miserable at work or not challenged or not finding them in a place where they're leaning into becoming the fullest version of themselves. It's like they're almost living these half lives. They're settling for things and then convincing themselves to be grateful for what they have instead of looking for ways to go after what they really want in their life. And I think that sometimes it takes these like watershed moments in our lives to wake us up to the fact that we are sleepwalking.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, I agree with you. The way that I interpret this, especially for those, if you run into doctors, dentists, lawyers, chiropractors, they put so much time into a specific designation, a specific profession,
Yep.
and all of the debt that is associated with that respective designation,
It
that is not your identity.
Right.
It's not your identity. It is the job you chose to do to try and provide income for your family, but it is not your identity. And that year after I walked away was the deepest, darkest, messed up year for me in terms of what am I?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It took a long time to finally essentially rebirth myself to say it's like I knew what wasn't important. I knew my brain led me to go down this path. It was never in my heart to do dentistry. Never.
Mhm. But
And that,
that transition that you're talking about, that like kind of confronting, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? I think what you're really talking about doing requires you to let go of who you have been
Right.
in order to become who you are supposed to be. And that is not an easy thing to do.
Well,
no,
and
no, not at all. Um, and it was only because of, yeah, because I mean, to sit with your thoughts and say, what's the next step? Because I walked away at 42. What I
right.
realized is this might be a little bit of a sabbatical. I am not ready to retire. I mean,
Mhm,
to retire is to put out to pasture. I'm like, okay, I am too young to
Hmm.
not be productive in some way, shape, or form,
mhm.
but I needed time for my nervous system to relax, my brain to just have ideas and thoughts to say, it's like, look, you are now capable and allowed to do anything you want.
Yeah.
Find something that's going to make you happy this time.
Mhm.
Well, and you got to get past the sunk cost piece of it, right? How many hours, how many years, how many dollars did you spend getting to that point and just to walk away from it? That's a huge, and I think that's why so many people do it, right? They're not necessarily trapped, but like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Especially if you've got a family. It's like I have a responsibility to these
Otherwise,
people.
otherwise, why did I do all these things that led up to this moment, right? It's like throwing it in the trash a little bit. It's like it almost takes an admission that what I did wasn't the right thing for me. But then you have to acknowledge that the next thing might not be either. I think there's
A
just so
little bit of
much,
grace there.
yeah, there's so much fear in doing that. And so first of all, I applaud you for actually doing it, because that in and of itself is a huge deal and I mean, that requires a tremendous amount of bravery.
Yeah.
But then secondly, my brain immediately goes to the question of, how were you able to create the space to think? I mean, to take that downtime off, to figure out what you wanted to do next. I mean, I think that is one of the issues that a lot of people face, is they're like, okay, well, I know I don't want this. I need time and space to figure out what I want to do. And they don't see how they can create that space for themselves. So can you talk
Right.
about how you did that?
Yeah, good point. And the reason why I was able to take the time and space to go specifically with what you said is because I arranged my financial life by a different system. And so as I was transitioning out, I was having lunch with a dentist and he asked me an obvious question. How are you walking away? Because I never had a big practice when it comes to the world of dentistry. But I made one silly comment to him. I said, well, I kind of figured out how to make money move. And he gave me that Scooby Doo look. And
Brr.
I tried to explain this exactly. I tried to explain these concepts, and I just didn't do a good job that day. But a few weeks later, I get the next statement for my house payment in the mail, and I take a picture of it and I send it to him as a joke. And I said, hey, take a look at this. My house payment was $24.19. And all he could write back was, I see it. I don't understand how you can have a $24 house payment. I'm
Mhm.
buying a condo next month. Will you be my coach? Okay. He was going to do the 30-year mortgage like everyone does. He paid off the condo in 8 months. And I was like, well, that's interesting. He's like, what do I do now? I'm like, I don't know. I was like, go have a drink. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But he tells his business partner, and I tell a friend of mine what happened, and they become the next two people I help. And then I was like, that's when I finally was able to go into my heart. And it's like, this is why you're here. This is the reason why you are on this planet, is to share these rules, these principles, this system, and how people can do this for themselves so that they can be what I call being cash flow optimizers. See it, their own CFO. That's just a joke on this chief financial officer, but it's being financially led through this. I'm not here. I don't go into your bank accounts. I know what bank you'll use. I don't have your login. I don't have your password. You're being led by me. I'm there as a guide so you can do this for yourself.
So I think the thing that is really key here with this cash flow optimization is that if you're doing things the traditional way, it's going to take you a long time to get out of debt, even if your only debt is your mortgage.
Right.
With what you're doing, it is not a traditional debt pay down structure, right? It's not the way everybody else seems to look at debt. And I had heard, I think probably years ago. So I don't know if we've ever talked about this, Howard, but I started my career in the mortgage industry in 2003. And I was in mortgage for probably 3 years. And there was a strategy that was super popular in Australia, where there were different rules around mortgage structure than what we can do in the United States, that I remember seeing. And I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could actually do this here? And then I totally forgot all about that strategy because we couldn't at the time do it here. And then when Eric introduced me to you, see, I'm giving you credit for once, Eric. When Eric introduced me to you, I was like, wait a minute, this sounds really familiar. Show me how you're doing it.
Yep. And so it did start in Australia. So 20-ish years ago now. It's called an offset mortgage there. Basically, anything that's part of a British Commonwealth, Australia, London, Canada, kind of, sort of, the US. It is this idea of breaking open the titanium safe of a mortgage so that you can actually access the equity. And so if you now have this open-ended tool versus the one-way street of your funds, now you can take the cash that's setting aside and put it against this open-ended debt and smush things together. When you smush things together, you're lowering the balance of the mortgage in this case. When you lower the balance, you're lowering the amount of interest per day you are being charged. But you do live. And so when those monthly expenses come up in terms of utilities, gas, food, credit card bill, subscriptions, travel, that's when you take the money out of the line and you just rinse and repeat, because the surplus is not sitting in a checking account. It's not sitting in a savings account.
Right.
It's sitting against the largest debt that you have, which is usually your house, and lowering that really, really fast.
Mm-hmm. Without you having to change lifestyle.
Correct.
Right. It's just a re-optimization of the flow.
Yep.
And this is why I think these conversations are so important, Howard, is that we get in our head that there is one way to do things. And then that's the way we do it. And because that's the way we learned it, we don't question it and we don't look at doing it differently. But when you look at the bulk of the recommendations that are made in the financial industry, whether it's on the offensive side and you're building wealth, or whether it's on the defensive side and you're cannibalizing debt, right, and getting rid of it, it is very much skewed towards the benefit of the institutions. And it is about minimizing lifestyle today in order to have some deferred gratification, right? Like even normal debt pay down is dramatically reduce your lifestyle and then put money towards the debt and don't touch it and give up life experiences But with your strategy, you can pay down the debt faster. And if you need access to your cash, you still have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Will
And
you
so,
tell the story about the couple that that was gonna forego their 10-year anniversary trip?
yeah, it's, oh, I was just thinking about something you said beforehand.
Okay, well, you can
Like,
come back to it. I'm ADHD. I'm all
oh,
over the place.
oh, no, it's all good, but just something that you mentioned, I was like, oh, that's when I said that. So yeah, so this was a couple doing really well. They live in the Midwest, so housing prices aren't too crazy versus like East Coast, West Coast, things like that. So they had 28 years left on their mortgage. They had 5 years left on their truck, where the truck payment was nearly as much as the mortgage.
Oh
Okay.
gosh.
Um, they wanted to, build out a deck and all of that fun stuff. And I was like, what other dreams are coming up, in the next 1, 3, 5 years? And he says, oh, well, there's our 10-year wedding anniversary. It's in about 18 months at the time. I said, great. How much are you expecting to do that for? I don't know, $10,000. I was like, awesome. I just want to have a number so I can figure this out. So I say, so I do the analysis. I get back with them. It's like, look, you got 28 years left on the house. You have 5 years left on your truck. We can pay all this debt off in 3 years. And of course, is like, are you sure? And it's like, yeah, it's just as Eric mentioned, it's about changing the flow of money. We get going. They're seeing this works. They're like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. A few months later, now they're getting ready to start planning the trip, and they said, how much should we say we were going to do for the our anniversary? And so I emailed them back and said, you did say 10,000, but I just threw in there, what if they just went all out? They just say, and they did 20 grand for their 10-year anniversary. It's one time. She went through all sorts of medical issues. I was like, your debt-free date changes 2 to 3 months, yet you are
Right.
still 25 years ahead. Take the freaking trip of a lifetime. Just take the trip, because that's going to matter more than we paid off our house 2 months faster. Like,
Right. We
that's
adulted today.
that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is for you to, like, you have to be a good steward. Let's be clear about that. But they were good stewards. Now let's have the experiences, because that's what makes life.
Right.
Right.
Well, and it kind of goes back to this idea, and something we've talked about quite a bit before, is that if money were math, we'd all be rich and famous, right? But money is human behavior, and there's stupid people in the system that muck it up, right? But I think it's this idea of I don't, yeah, and
Yeah, if you're listening and not watching when Eric said that, we're both pointing at ourselves,
yeah,
right?
we've
We all have that emotion that gets in the way of logic.
yeah, we have met the enemy, and he is us. But it reminds me of this idea that, and I remember Joe, Mary's dad, who was sort of my mentor in the business. For years and years and years and years, Joe was like, you know what? We don't pay off our mortgage. That's the last debt line item that we pay off because the interest rate's low. It's better. We were having this whole intellectual conversation around the impact of inflation on a mortgage and all the rest of the stuff. And it was just weeks and weeks and years of education on this. And I remember about 2 years before he retired, he walks into my office and he goes, "Hey, Eric, I paid off my house." I'm like, "What the heck, Joe?" Like, how many times have we had this conversation that you never do this? You should get a 50-year mortgage. And he says, I was just so sick of it. I'm just so sick of it. I just had to be done. And I'm like, okay, well, then that's the answer, right? And I think we forget that there's humans that are sick of things and just want to have them done. And that all the math in the world doesn't change that.
But what the
Yes,
math does change, right? And I think this
Right.
goes to what you said earlier, is how the interest accrues. And if you're accruing less in interest over time,
Right.
you can pay stuff down much more quickly.
yes, you're both correct. And what Mary's dad wasn't doing what I now call the next level of question, because all he was doing was looking at the interest rate and in kind of the traditional, I make X, the next widget costs Y. Does Y fit within the budget of X?
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
But if we can look at every debt as a potential investment and say, like, I don't know what, we're just going to make up numbers here with your dad, Mary, but like, let's just say that
Sure.
his balance was down to $150,000 for his mortgage, but the payment every month was $2,000 a month. If he were to pay that off, what is the cash on cash return of that? So that would be 24,000 a year divided by 150,000. Of course, I'm doing hard numbers in my head.
Yeah, I don't know why you didn't say 100,000, because then that math would be really easy. Let's pretend
Okay,
he had 100,000.
Six
fine.
years.
So, but whatever it is, so 24,000 over divided by 100 is 24%. Where else could he get a 24% cash on cash return?
Mhm.
Right.
If he can get it guaranteed, if he can get that guaranteed, then that's where he should be investing. But because he was so fixated on the interest rate and
Right.
not on the payment, it's the payment that determines in terms of how much do we have to spend on everything else. If we get rid of the payment, it just becomes a lot easier. So it's one of those that I am not the Dave Ramsey poster child. I'm not the Susie Orman poster child that everyone has to be debt free, but you just have to look in terms of how much debt remains and how big is that payment, that it might just make sense that that is the next quote unquote right investment to do.
Mhm.
Right.
So here's what I think you said that's brilliant. And I just want to draw some parallels here, because I feel like every time we talk, I see like deeper connection. What you just said was essentially, if you fixate on rate, you miss the bigger picture of flow, right?
That's what I heard. That's
And yeah, that's how it came out for you too. I'm glad. I feel like I'm like translating what I heard, and I don't know if that's what anyone else heard. But the piece of that that's so key is that whether you are making an actual investment and it's looking at, okay, here's your rate of return over time, or you're looking at the rate that you're paying on debt, you're missing the picture that is income. And if you shift your perspective and you're looking at income, you make totally different choices
right.
that impact lifestyle in immediate ways, as opposed to focusing on rate, whether it's on the investment or the debt side, puts you back into that deprivation state where
Right.
you have obligation and you lose flexibility.
Yeah. Well, and everything
100%.
is fear.
Right. Well, and I'll tell you, I mean, so when we first had this conversation, I was like, all this sounds good. It feels like magic. And then I told Eric, I was like, that must be how our clients feel all the time, where they're like, this sounds really great. I want all the things that you're talking about. I want to pay my debt off, and instead of in 22 years, I want to pay it off in 3 and be totally debt free and have all that flexibility, right? I want to take my future income and have it magically increase by 30 to 70%.
Right.
But my next question is always how? And that's where you broke it down with spreadsheets and walked through like month by month. Here is even the cash flow and how it would work. And you took all the mystery out of it. And that to me made it totally approachable, because it made it abundantly clear that it isn't magic. It's really pretty basic math, right? But it's also
Yeah.
math I'm never going to do for myself. And I don't know where to go to get the right structure for a loan or the right bank to make sure all the transaction helps easy. And I think that's why having someone who can hold your hand through all of it is so key. I mean, I think about the way we build plans. You can have everything we do. You can take it. You can do it yourself. You can do it
Right.
with a different advisor. The number of times people actually do that, though, is very, very small, because they see, look, you know how to do this. You've done it over and over and over again. You can keep me from making silly mistakes because you know what to look out for. And I think that's the beauty of having somebody like you, and having seen it with my own numbers. It's not magic. It's just understanding how interest is calculated and how your cash flow changes your outcome.
Yeah. And Mary, you brought up a good point, is that, like, as you said, when every client approaches you guys, you give the information. And as we
Yeah.
know, there's more than enough information out there. Anyone can find it. It's implementation that matters.
Yep.
Mhm.
Well, but I also think it's having the context from somebody that's been there before that is such a big deal. And it's one of those things that I can't see around corners that I don't know exist. And so having somebody to go, hey, look, I know it seems weird, but around this other corner is this other thing. It's another way to look at the world. It's another way to approach it. I remember the first time we got introduced to a concept called EVA, economic value add. And it reminded me of what you're talking about here is like every dollar should have a job. And if it's not doing, to your illustration, right? If it's not doing 24% work, then it's not being used very effectively. How do I do it better? But giving it a cheap job is based out of fear, and it's based out of an old framework, an old mindset. And so it's not anything magical. It's just changing the way you look at the problem. And to me, that's every bit of it. And then the implementation is just execution at that point, but still need somebody to walk you through that.
So Howard, do you mind giving like an example, maybe like the client you are most proud of, or the one that was the biggest win for you? Like here's where they were, here's what you did, here's where they ended up. It's hard to pick just one, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there we were.
Yeah. I mean, so there's one that's not, it's not the biggest win yet, but it will be a pretty large win. So there was one, and again, because of my history with dentistry, a lot of my clients are dentists. There is a ton of debt everywhere. A lot of them just want to be rid of it. They just have no idea how to get there. Okay.
Right.
Actually, forget that one. I'm going to talk about one that is onboarding right now. I just spoke with the CPA, and I think it was the bookkeeper, but let's just say that they were both CPAs who were way against in terms of what I was doing. Way against. I had to sit there and explain for 45 minutes, this is what we intend to do. And I'm not going to get into break down all of the details, but let me just get to the highlight. Right now, this dentist has their practice loan is $20,000 a month. Okay, every single month, 20,000 bucks. So now I'm just to separate out CPA bookkeeper. So the bookkeeper is just like, well, she can pay it down. I was like, okay, I get that. So like she took out $120,000 in profit last year. She could have used that to pay this down. It's like, okay, that would bring it from $500,000 to 380,000. But what's the payment the next month?
Still 20 grand.
Still 20 grand. And now we just lost all the liquidity.
Yep.
All right. And you lose the liquidity. That's when things start to pucker in places.
That's when you get scared. Right.
Yes. Okay. And I said, if we rearrange things, and again, I'm not going to get into the details here, but if we rearrange things, we can literally go from $20,000 down to $4,000 month one. Which is easier to pay, 4 or 20?
Right.
And the bookkeeper is like, but you're borrowing from here to do that. I'm like, which is easier to pay, 4 or 20?
Right.
And the CPA was like, well, 4. I was like, exactly. So I just freed up $190,000 a year in terms of cash flow, that if there's a couple slow months, now this dentist doesn't have to freak out.
Right. There's some stress relief because they can still pay 20 grand a month if they want to.
Absolutely. And the way that we're going to do this, we're going to pay this off. Like there's 3.5 years left. We'll pay this off in 8 months. Okay. So it will be gone, and it's not going to be that 4,000 all the time. We're going to, it slowly chips away, but it's one of those, I just want to go back to, it's like, we're not reneging on the debts. All of the payments that we have, we're still doing it. We're just changing the flow so that we are not stuck with this fixed debt payment of $20,000 every single month that we have to worry about.
Right.
And so that's kind of the most recent win.
But it's well, it's just so impressive because at the other end of it, there's a part of my brain as you're talking, I'm like, but 20,000, and that's what you signed up for, and you should do that, and then like you should eat your peas, and like you honor that, and it's like there's a part of my brain that's like, yeah, but that feels like cheating because you're getting around it, but it's not.
Too easy. It's too easy.
That's the thing, right? Shouldn't life be hard and we win because we sucked it up and we ate beans and weenies and we lived on ramen, but and we made it out on the other end because that's the stories we hear.
Yeah. And obviously I'm going to disagree with you because it's
so you should.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously I do, but because there's really three buckets in terms of knowledge. You know what you know what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
I clearly, with what I do, am falling in the you don't know what you don't know camp.
Yep.
Right.
All right. And so for me to now expose this to someone, I mean, that's like I just T-boned you as you're driving 80 miles an hour down the highway. And it's like, and you're just like, is this guy for real? And it's like,
Well, and your
yeah,
brain wants to pull you back to the old math because that's what's comfortable,
That's the
right?
devil, you know. Yeah.
It's the same thing that happens to people in therapy. You can be in a therapy session and the therapist says something brilliant and you're like, now I know there's a better way to do something. Well, you still do it the old way because that's the synapse that's the strongest, and it takes a heck of a lot of work to reprogram yourself to think differently and then act differently. That's why the coaching is necessary. So I want to be cognizant of time because I got a hard stop here coming up. So I have a couple of questions. So the first one is, does it matter if someone is a business owner or a W-2 employee? Can everybody do this or only certain people?
anyone can do it, but I always kind of say the stipulation you should already be a good steward of your money, aka you understand income needs to be less than expenses. You're putting away for retirement, you have the emergency fund, you still have extra cash, and you're like, now what? Okay. I only get into the specific part of this debt pay down and optimizing cash flow. So in terms of, if you want to think of it from a football perspective, Mary and Eric, they are the offensive coordinators for you in terms of how do we take that extra and multiply it for the future. I am the defensive coordinator. How do we free up the money today so that we can now play offense even better?
Right.
So if somebody wants to see how a system like this could work for them, how do they find you?
So the website is financiallyled.com. And the lead is kind of a play on words because the system is three steps: lift the burden from fixed debt payments, expand your cash reserves, deploy the extra dollars into assets. So
LED.
this is,
Nice.
I lead it right up to where you guys can then take over. So that's financiallyled.com.
I love it. Howard, you are awesome. I think anyone who talks to you will have a completely different outlook and a completely different trajectory for how
Oh,
they can get debt free in a very, very short period of time. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom with us and with our audience.
yeah. Thanks, Howard.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Eric, if they're looking for you, where can they find you?
At Economics with Eric, wherever you use social media. And how about you?
At The Wealth Woman. Again,
Uh,
wherever you social media.
Thanks, guys.
Specific financial concepts and advanced strategies are presented to you for educational purposes only. We cannot and do not guarantee their applicability to your individual circumstance. We encourage you to seek personalized advice from qualified professionals on all financial matters.
Provided content is for overview and is not intended and should not be relied upon as individualized tax, legal, fiduciary, or investment advice. Neither Wealth Woman, Acorn Grove, or the Wealth and Income Podcast, nor their representatives provide tax or legal advice. For answers to specific questions and before making any decision, please consult a qualified attorney or tax advisors.
All numeric examples and any individual shown are hypothetical and were used for explanatory purposes only. Actual results may vary.
Investing involves risk, which includes potential loss of principal. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company.
Life insurance should be purchased by individuals that have a need to provide a death benefit to protect others with insurable interests in their lives against financial loss. Life insurance is not a retirement plan, investment, or savings account.
Not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or any governmental agency. Insurance and investment products, not a deposit, not FDIC or NCUA insured, not insured by any federal government agency, not guaranteed by any bank or credit union, may lose value.
Please visit the Wealth Woman website disclosure page for other important disclosures.